Hello, welcome to Quackalope. Thank you for being here. Today, I'm going to help all of us, myself included, have the best time possible when diving in and starting a new campaign of Frosthaven. And not just any campaign, a campaign you actually want to see the end of, a campaign you intend to finish, whether you're playing solo or with a group of friends in your local community or now all around the world. This is a game that can be a little intimidating when you first look at it. 20 pounds of board game ready to be spread across your table, years worth of content to explore, characters to unlock, hidden mysteries to reveal, a book of scenarios and flavor text that could fill a novel. Slightly more advanced, complex, and unique when it comes to the strategy and the storytelling than its predecessor, Gloomhaven. And I think it's earned its own right to be on, well, a shelf of fame. Sadly for me, though, it's been on the shelf of shame for the last 3 or 4 years. And now is the perfect time to begin fixing that. You see, Frosthaven Digital is available right now. If you follow the link in the top of this video description, you can dive into what I argue is the best way to experience the Haven saga of games. The computer runs the DM side of the experience. It makes sure your rules are right and runs the statistics that I've never had fun managing, and you get to learn about the story, the world, play through the scenarios, lose the scenarios, and replay the scenarios again, but you don't have to go through all the setup that it's required on the table, and really fully experience the strategy and the depth when you dive into these games. It's the only way that my wife and I even have a chance of finishing Gloomhaven, and now that we have a 11-month-old, a chance of finishing Frosthaven as well. So, swing over. It's currently available as a early access to everyone who's paying attention, and as they finish the development, I believe they're planning on releasing 120 plus scenarios and all the content, hopefully, maybe, possibly even more, that was originally stuffed into this box. So, in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the 10 things you need to know, I need to know, we all need to know before diving into a campaign of Frosthaven. Whether you're coming as an experienced Gloomhaven or Jaws the Lion adventurer, whether you've played as a solo, double-handed strategist, or you've allowed other people to run the campaign for you, you've sat down at a table and just enjoyed the original or enjoyed Frosthaven with a group of friends every now and then, well, these are things you need to be aware of before you start your own campaign. Number 1, you can always make the game harder. Or easier, but harder is the main point here. When I journey into a brand new video game, like for instance, the first time I played The Last of Us, I want to start on hard, or at least difficult. I don't want to feel like I'm making the game easier for myself. I don't want to reduce it from what the designers intended for it to be, and I always feel like in the video game world, slightly above average is where the designers wanted the game to exist. Unless, of course, you're playing Dark Souls, and then it's as hard as possible, even on easy mode, and I've never made it through the first boss settlement experience? I don't know. That's besides the point. Frosthaven isn't like that. Frosthaven's one of these games that self-balances itself, has all those numbers worked out so that as you scale the game, easier or harder, as you figure out where your crew operates and experiences it the best, you can dial in those numbers. You'll be rewarded more, you'll have more enemies, you'll have the game adjust itself to the metrics that you present. The challenge will remain worthwhile. The adventure will still be enjoyable, and you don't need to start on hard mode. In fact, what the community recommends is to start on 0, meaning enemies aren't getting a buff at all, or even -1, meaning enemies are being debuffed just a bit. I remember diving into the very first campaign of Gloomhaven I ever experienced, and Sheer and I think, replayed that first scenario like 3 or 4 times, or at least one of those first scenarios multiple times, just figuring out the strategy of the game, and that wasn't so fun. You know what was fun? Beating some enemies, accomplishing a chapter, stepping forward in the campaign, upgrading, equipping, getting new cards, experience points, and then dialing up the competition depending on how we were feeling. So don't be scared to give yourself a little bit of a break as you learn these characters, as you learn the mechanics and the strategy and the flow of the game. Number 2, resource management. Resources in Frosthaven are different than they are in Gloomhaven. So if you're a Gloomhaven fan, forget everything you've learned. Coins are no longer the epitome of existence. Instead, now you need items. You need lumber, you need timber, you need different herbs, you need metal, you need arrow vines, you need axe nuts. You need to collect all these resources to develop your settlement, to grow the village, to invest in a part of the campaign that didn't exist in the predecessor. So as you play, there's some important things to remember when you start deciding how to use, sell, spend, or hoard the resources you have. First off, gold is few and far between in the early stages of the game. Yeah, it's nice to have, but don't expect to get your hands on much of it until you potentially have way too much. So don't worry about going after it. Don't fight and pine and be disappointed when it's not flowing out of your pockets like it was in Gloomhaven. Even then, it was maybe a little scarce, but here, it's frigid. You should build. You need to develop your outpost, and you should try to do so every single time you have a new outpost phase. Now, there is the opportunity to build extra, and kind of the general consensus is you shouldn't really double build until you've upped your morale at least to a reasonable level. I, for strategy's sake, won't tell you what a reasonable level is, but you don't need to double build. But you don't want to let an opportunity for a normal single build pass by. So hold on to the resources, prioritize looting, and make sure you're ready to continue developing the settlement that you're returning to. You should pay attention to generators. Generators in your settlement are things that are going to produce extra resources for you, that won't require you to go out on a new adventure in order to discover them. You can create them. Opportunities will present themselves. Don't ignore them. As each stage of the game progresses, the things you need in order to construct, develop, move the campaign forward in some interesting ways, those resources become more costly. And I don't think it's quite a balanced, sure it is, a balanced scale. The amount you need later in the game is way higher than what you think you're going to need early on. You're going to feel like you have plenty of resources to start, or at least more than you initially need. Don't worry, the designers will fix that. This game is supposed to feel like you're in a tundra and resources are scarce. So, that's point number 2. Hold on to resources. Loot every single thing you can when you go into an encounter. Don't ignore an opportunity to find, gain, and acquire more. Build at least once every outpost phase, and invest in resources or resource generators at some point. Not the first thing necessarily, but definitely don't ignore them while you play. Point number 3, and I kind of just touched on this, loot everything. I mean, really, loot everything. When you go into a scenario, grab the treasure chests, because you're not going to be buying very many resources or very many items to upgrade your characters, especially early on. Stop on some coins if you're moving your way by, or use a special loot action off your card to grab as many as you possibly can. Take that extra turn. Take that extra moment. Try your best to find, uncover, and pull out all the resources you can get your hands on. Because again, resources are scarce. Number 4, play your whole hand. Now, this is a classic strategy thing that goes into how people experience Gloomhaven, Frosthaven, the Haven games in general. And it's not always obvious, which is why it's worth pointing out. The fun thing to do might be to do a long rest or a short rest in order to grab that extra card that you need to kill that guy standing right in front of you. But these games, these scenarios are tightly balanced. And almost every time I find myself pressed up against a wall, trying my best to make it to that finish line, to accomplish that objective, to kill that boss, to uncover the mystery of the episode, and I'm usually down to the last few actions I have on hand. So if you rest before you've played out your entire available hand, you've put yourself in a position where you've cost yourself one extra turn. Because if I've got 2 cards left in my hand and I decide to rest now, I'm removing one of those cards, meaning the opportunity to use that turn is passed by. This game becomes tighter the farther you move along in it, in a very satisfying, very rewarding, very, very clenching way. Don't ignore that for the sake of fun. Now, if you're done with everything you need to do and all you have left is to move forward, move forward. Use a loot action if you can. Go stand in a doorway and let the enemies muddle their way towards you. Let your allies catch up. Just don't rush it. Rushing can cost a lot. You can pay a steep price by trying to sprint your way through the dungeon or kill enemies and get to the middle of the scenario before your allies have kept pace with you. So, play your full hand. Let all the turns last on the page. Take your time, be strategic, plan a couple turns ahead. Make sure the cards you have remaining you'll be able to utilize at least as much as you can. And if there's a turn where all you do is take a couple of steps forward, that's okay. That is still worthwhile because it gives you one extra turn in the battlefield, on the map. Gives your allies one extra turn to get a little bit closer to you. Lets you all move forward together as a party instead of exhausting yourself early and costing yourself the late game. Point number 5. Party makeup. Now, very soon I'm going to enter a spoiler section of this video, and there we'll get into a little bit more community opinions around the strongest characters, the weakest characters, the stuff that you might not want to know if you're looking to either play a more challenging game or have your opinion swayed on which character you should choose when you begin your adventure. But for now, let's just talk about the characters that we have and give you a quick overview. We have the Bone Shaper, the Banner Spear, the Geminite, the Blink Blade, the Drifter, and the Deathwalker. The Drifter is a solo tank. Heavy hitting, does have some powerful heal abilities for support options, but for the most part is going to be brutalizing, moving in, and knocking out opponents. The Banner Spear is strategic, all about positioning, but not positioning herself, also positioning of her allies. Plays very well at higher player counts because you got more people on the table, but can also utilize things like summons and other creatures in the map in order to trigger some of her more powerful abilities. Bone Shaper is going to be pulling those summons out of the ground, bringing relics of, well, the undead back to life and allowing them to soak up damage. She can hit heavy, but the main thing she does is block really, really effectively. She's a protector and a guider for all these other little creatures running around. For me, I always avoid these characters when I'm playing in person. This is a character that's actually probably going to play very, very well in a digital space because I don't have to worry about all the extra rules around the minions that I'm summoning. Instead, I can just get them all out on the table and have fun with them. We have the Deathwalker. The Deathwalker over here is going to be maneuvering in a unique way. It's going to be portaling around the board, trying to get some strategic shots in, some ranged opportunities to really knock an enemy out. She isn't going to be weakening the entire table. Instead, she's going to be pinpoint, destroying one big creature at a time. So she needs help. She needs some defense. She needs some allies there at the table. But if you like playing a ranged character who has some very interesting abilities, she might be a good one to dive into. The Blink Blade is going to be fast, quick, and nimble, kind of hitting little damage on all the other players or all the other enemies around the table. If you've read the book or listened to the book, He Who Fights with Monsters, this is kind of the Jason Asano of the Frosthaven world. Pop up, stab some people with a poison dagger, and move along on your merry way. Either clean up or weaken for your allies to do the dirty work. And finally, we have the Geminite, which is one of the more complicated characters in the entire game, playing a dual hand, a ranged character and a melee character. Has a lot of versatility, but it requires some careful timing, strategic thinking, and very, very accurate play. Communication is going to be big. Depending on what other character is in your party or characters are in your party, the Geminite can pair well or add a lot of complexity to the table, and you're just going to have to judge for yourself. How advanced do you want to play? How unique, creative, powerful do you want your synergies to be? And who else is playing what when you start your adventure? Across the board, in terms of community verdict on the complexity of these characters, the Drifter is going to be the easiest and really matches with all of these very, very well, which we'll talk about again in just a bit. The medium complexity are going to be the Banner, the Banner Spear, the Deathwalker, and the Bone Shaper. Those three are reasonably complex, have lots of different interesting pathways where you can build out their repertoire and design them kind of how you enjoy playing, but they're not going to be quite as complex as the Blink Blade or the very hard Geminite. Both of those very playable, but you'll probably want to listen to some of these strategies that I have coming up around how to manage your cards and pay attention to the actions, symbols, and turns that you have coming up. So, moving on to point number 6, and this is just general strategy when it comes to playing this game. I would suggest the same thing for people that are sitting down in a tabletop setting, but in this case, because you're playing in a digital environment, this can be an important way for you to approach, think about, and maintain the experience of playing, thinking, the strategy involved in sitting at a table when you're actually sitting at a computer screen and talking over mics. So first off, it might be worthwhile to have some reference cards, some symbols for you to take a look at. You could print out a sheet, you could pull them from your own copy of Frosthaven. I'm sure there's prints and copies available online. But this is just an easy way to read your cards. A lot of these cards have symbology replacing a good portion of the text. And yeah, you will become familiar with that, but early on in the game, because we're just starting out on our full campaign, some of those symbols will slip your mind. You're not always going to want to look them up, and it's not always going to be easy to get a reference for exactly what they're saying they do. And if you have a little note card to reference, well, that's a nice way to think through your strategy without being too bogged down on clicking on buttons and links and looking at appendices and all that extra stuff. You might want to have a little notebook next to you, like I usually carry with me, to write down some story notes, some pathways you might want to explore, to just listen as the narrative unfolds. Digital, you either become very absorbed in the narrative because you love watching the animations and listening to the voiceover and the text and the story, or you actually miss a little bit more because you're not reading it yourself. So take some notes, listen carefully. There are cues and adventures to be had that are contained within the text of the game, and while the digital space will direct you on many of those pathways, I think your experience will be enhanced if you make sure that you're paying attention. Finally, I believe the best way to approach the card strategy of Frosthaven, even in a digital space, is to have the cards physically in your hand. I don't guarantee that this exists, but I would be very surprised if it didn't. Over on Board Game Geek, BGG, or some other sites like Reddit, copies or printouts of all these cards that you could run and, have to cycle through. Or, if you have a copy of Frosthaven, which I think a lot of your digital players will have a copy of Frosthaven available, grab the cards from your deck, have them sitting around and in front of you. That'll allow you to place them off to the side, to strategically read through and figure out your abilities, to not have to be looking at the screen for the entire duration. You can set the cards out, planning your next sequence of attacks. It lets you think, plan, and move forward at least until you're very comfortable with the strategy of each of the characters you're playing. I think the physicality of the cards is important at times to the way that you start and move through an episode. And just one example of that for me, I really think matters. If I'm struggling between actions, if I'm trying to figure out what to do, and I've just been reading the same sequence of cards over and over, you kind of get blinders on after a little while. So I'll shuffle the cards, mix them up, and then start looking through them in a different order just to shift my perspective, rethink about how these cards could pair together. And you can't do that as easily in a digital space. So, grab the cards from your box, print out notes on the cards if Cephalofair has made those available, and have them in front of you. Be ready to dive in. Okay, that's the end of point number 6. The next 4 points technically have some degree of spoilers. Now, these spoilers are not massive in any regard. They are general overviews, but they do reveal a little bit of information about how the campaign strategically unfolds and gives you a little bit of a heads up of what you might want to anticipate or expect. I argue that they're worth listening to because they don't ruin any blind boxes or any core reveals throughout the experience, and they prevent you from running into some situations that can be unfun if you hadn't anticipated them in the first place. So, point number 7. Build walls by the winter. The winter is going to come around week 9 or 10, depending on how fast you've moved through the campaign. And if you don't have walls, because summertime is pretty straightforward, feels very comfortable, you think you can manage it with a couple soldiers that you've hired to stick on the wall, and you're really not worried about raiders, the winter is going to be another story. If you don't have walls prepared, you're going to get hit hard and heavy at least a few times as the winter descends. So get a few walls constructed. You don't need to do them first thing off the bat. You just want a few in place before you move on to the next cold season. Point number 7, 8? I'm not sure. I've got 3 more, so you do the math. Retirement matters. You should aim to finish your personal objective or your character retirement by about week 15, or 15 cycles for each character. And the earlier retirements matter more than the later ones, at least when it comes to how your settlement develops. Because as your outpost grows and characters retire, you're going to have new buildings and more advanced buildings open up as more people stop adventuring and start settling, building, constructing, developing, and designing this outpost that you're relying on to move the campaign forward. For you to survive and grow, you're going to want a few characters who've decided to live and take a step back. So, don't make it to 20 scenarios, 20 episodes, 20 weeks before you decide to check that final box and move one of your characters off. I know some of them are very fun to play, but trust me, the box is packed full of enough adventures and experiences and new ways to fight your battles that you're going to want to move forward anyway. So, just take a note of it, and push your companions if you're getting on the later end of that scale. Point number 9. At a certain point, early on, you're going to unlock the ability to develop a garden, and that probably will matter, because herbs are few and far between. They're hard to come by, and the garden allows you to plant, grow, and harvest herbs as you play. They're required in potion development and some resources that you're really going to want in the later stages of the campaign, so if you haven't gathered them or begun gathering the opportunity for them early on, you might find yourself hard-pressed in some areas that you just didn't anticipate coming up. So, get the garden, plant some herbs, and start that farm developing and growing. And then finally, let's talk about character synergy. This is the part that I said I wasn't going to tell you because I didn't want to sway you on who you picked. I want you to pick who you think is fun, but let's talk about the characters that we have available and the synergies that exist with them. First off, the Blinkblade and the Drifter are considered universally the more powerful characters, with the Blinkblade coming in at the top. 80%, over 200 votes over on BGG, said that the Blinkblade was a complex but extremely powerful or slightly overpowered character in the game. The Drifter is just universally good with a total of 68% or over 180 voters, determining that the Drifter was extremely powerful. Maybe not quite as powerful as the Blinkblade, but definitely above average when it comes to their utility across the tabletop. Both of these characters are unique in some ways, but allow you to, hit hard, move fast, soak up some damage. They each have their own way that they fit into a party, but they're going to be powerful characters if you decide or one of your allies decides to play them. I'm going to talk about two-player synergies, because the majority of the players, I think, are going to be two-player. When you really get into the 3 or the 4-party synergies, all the characters mesh very well together, so it honestly comes down to who you think you want to play. But at 2 players, the synergies matter a touch more. The most powerful, kind of OP synergy, according to the community, is the Bone Shaper and the Banner Spear, because the Bone Shaper pulls allies, and the Bone Shaper pulls summons, and the Banner Spear needs allies. So if you're going to be playing the Banner Spear, you're going to want the Bone Shaper to give you the extra companionship across the tabletop, or else you're going to find a lot of your cards just can't be utilized because you're not in the right position. You also have a very interesting mix with the Bone Shaper and the Drifter, specifically because the Bone Shaper spends their health to pull these summons, and the Drifter has not a lot, but some very powerful healing cards where you can invest in the party that you're with. So if you're playing 2-player, Bone Shaper can pull summons from the ground, and the Banner and the Drifter can keep them alive. So let's zoom in. What do each one of these characters want? The Drifter wants enemies. Hits hard, hits a lot, can block a lot of damage. That's one of the reasons why he matches well with all the characters across the experience. The Banner Spear needs companions. So stronger at a 3 or 4-player setting, at a 2-player setting, fairly weak with all the characters except for the Bone Shaper. Not impossible, certainly not, worth playing if you want to play the Banner Spear and you're just playing 2-player, but it's not going to be the easiest or most available set of actions that you have. The Bone Shaper needs health, which means the Drifter is the most straightforward partner for the Bone Shaper. You could also supplement with items and resources that you get, potions, like healing potions that you might want to use. However, to begin with, you're not going to have a lot of those on hand. You have the Deathwalker. The Deathwalker is ranged, big hitter, powerful. However, that also means that they're going to want people that are going to be standing in the front lines, blocking and taking some of those hits. Bone Shaper works well because he can put summons in front of the Deathwalker. The Drifter, like I said, will stand in front of people and just punch them in the face and get hit back. And the Geminite, which we haven't added into this mix so much, can operate in a melee and ranged capacity, meaning that it can be a blocker, but it could also be a sniper when both you and the Deathwalker are standing off to the side or off to the back, just pinging off enemies that are marching through a hallway towards their doom. We have the Blinkblade. Blinkblade's great at loot. Little bit of a glass cannon, can pick off the final blow or weaken enemies that are on the board, but really they're just going to be moving fast, gathering everything. Who do you want to pair them with? Everyone is an option. Drifter matches well with everyone. Banner Spear, Blinkblade can get into position for some of those more powerful attacks. Communication will be essential then. The Bone Shaper is good at blocking and distracting, so the Blinkblade can grab everything on the table. Deathwalker is going to be sniping people from afar. The Blinkblade can pop in, pull people in different directions, keep them out of the way, and kind of kite them around the board. And the Geminite, like I said, is a complex but very universal utilitarian character. So, judge it for yourselves. I like the Blinkblade because I like grabbing all the treasure chests, much to my wife's chagrin. And the Geminite. Geminite wants a larger party overall. They rely on careful strategic timing. That's what makes them more complex. You're going to be shifting between melee and range, 2 different decks of cards, 2 different hands to manage. And so they can fit with everyone. I think if you're going to be playing the Geminite, you want a little bit more of a base, heavy-hitting strategic character to partner with. So someone like the Drifter, the Bone, or the Bone Shaper are going to be your core. I think a Blinkblade Geminite would be a very interesting pairing. I also think we would get annihilated. As far as the community is concerned, the worst combinations you can make is the Banner Spear and the Geminite, or the Blinkblade with the Geminite or the Deathwalker. So those are the ones that they don't advise you to combine. I know, I said the Blinkblade could pair with everyone, and I stand by it, but it makes sense. 2 glass cannons, 2 vulnerable characters. It's probably going to end up with you all dead. So, there you have it. That's an overview. That's a breakdown. The final thing that I will say when it comes to loot and resources is the digital game, at least when I was experiencing it in this early access stage, hasn't directed me towards any of the gear that you start out the campaign with. And you only have 30 coins to spend, and you're going to be using this gear for a long time, and the original rulebook for Frosthaven did have recommendations that I would argue are probably the best gear that you can get for your own personal characters. So the Banner Spear was the winged shoes and the heater shield. The Bone Shaper was the Warden's robes. The Geminite was the leather armor and the Amulet of Life. The Blinkblade was the leather armor and the poisoned dagger. The Drifter was the winged shoes and the Amulet of Life. And the Deathwalker was the boots of speed. I think if you're playing any of these characters, the strongest, smartest, best way to approach the game is to buy what the designers recommended you buy. You can buy anything, but you're going to find you have some weaknesses that these items help support or close the gap in as you start getting experience and moving forward in the campaign. So there you have it. I hope this has been informative. I hope this sets you up for the best possible experience. And I hope you actually get a chance to explore through, play, and finish an actual campaign of Frosthaven. I've really, really appreciated and enjoyed playing through Digital Gloomhaven with my wife in the past, and I'm really excited to play through and journey through Frosthaven with her here in the near future. It's really the only way we're going to actually be able to complete this campaign, and this is a game that I desperately want to see the end of. I want to see the story unfold. So, there you have it. Follow the link in the top of the video description, swing over, and dive in to the early access opportunity, early access experience of Frosthaven, the digital game. Available now on Steam. And whatever the case, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing. If you fail a scenario, don't go home and let the weeks pass by. Just replay the scenario. You don't need to get another outpost. You don't need to move the week forward. You don't need to do another road event. I know you might think that you want to return home and recoup and gather your stuff or buy things or keep all your resources. Don't do it. Just dive back into the scenario right away. Time is not in your favor here. Winter is approaching fast, and you don't want to move the game forward playing a couple scenarios one or two additional times. That's all I'm going to say. Final tip, final strategy. We'll see you next time. Bye.